Posso começar então? Okay. Looks like we still have a connection issue. Okay, now it's live. We're gonna show this funny, back the backup behind the scenes. The behind the scenes are going to be shown at the beginning of the presentation. Desculpa, pessoal, que está participando do evento hoje, da primeira sessão do programa Connection da AACE Brasil de 2022. Teve alguns problemas técnicos aqui no início, mas vamos começar então aqui agora com o Stephen Cabano, uma pessoa que tem bastante experiência, baseado nos Estados Unidos. Ele é fundador e presidente da Pathfinder, uma empresa de consultoria e gerenciamento, especialmente na área de projetos industriais. Ele vai compartilhar hoje com a gente aqui a experiência dele nas áreas de atuação dele, da empresa dele, e como a gente tem feito em outras ocasiões, é um bate-papo em inglês. E se vocês tiverem perguntas, por favor mandem aqui, aí no chat do YouTube, que depois, mais no final da conversa aqui com o Steven, a gente vai passar as perguntas para ele, tá bom? Espero que vocês gostem e obrigado de novo pela audiência. Stephen, welcome. Apologize for my initial words in Portuguese.
Not a problem.
A lot of the audience is based in Brazil, or they are Brazilians based somewhere else. This is a program, as you know, that was launched by the AACE Brazil section. And the idea is for us to give the members of the Brazil AACE and also other professionals interested in the profession the opportunity to learn and to hear people with your kind of profile. And so that will give them the opportunity to learn and understand what's happening in other places of the world, right?
Sure.
So, having said that, I'd like to ask you to make a quick introduction of yourself.
Sure.
And then we'll go. I have 4 questions I have listed for you today. Hopefully we can go through them, and then if you have any questions from the audience, I'll let you know as well. So please, first quick introduction, and thank you again for being here today.
Yeah, no, thank you. And so my name is Steve Cabano. I represent a company called Pathfinder, as Felipe was saying. We are located here in the United States, in the northeast portion of the United States, in Philadelphia, or just outside of Philadelphia. We have an office in Houston and so on. And our role in the industry is to support owner organizations, primarily in the heavy industrial process side, right? So oil and gas owners, chemical, petrochemical owners, even power and pharmaceutical companies and things like that. Anything that kind of supports a process industry type project is typically our clients. So we support them by doing a lot of independent reviews on projects. We do cost estimate and schedule risk analyses. We help them in developing their project execution strategy, as well as supporting them with their contracting approach, and basically helping them kind of fill any void that they might have in their owner's resource and capability, to get projects executed very efficiently and effectively. So we've been doing this since 1975. So we've got quite a bit of history. I took over the leadership role of Pathfinder about, I guess, 11 years ago, maybe now, maybe a little bit longer. So, over those number of years, whatever that is, 47 years, I guess, we've got quite a database of information and statistics and metrics and so on. And we do keep tabs on how the industry is changing, either through societies like AACE or the Construction Industry Institute or the Project Management Institute and so on. We participate in members of all of those organizations. And then we also, just from our own experience of working on these projects day to day, is the information that I'd like to kind of share with you today based on some of our experience. So that's my background, and I'm a mechanical engineer. Graduated from Villanova University up in just outside of Philadelphia. and spent the first part of my career in the working for the Navy as a project manager, building the United States Navy, building facilities for the United States Navy. And then started to work with Pathfinder around, shows you how old I am, 1985, 86, somewhere around there. So been with the organization for quite a number of years. So that's my background.
All right. Okay. Again, congratulations for everything you guys have achieved. It's quite an impressive background. Okay, so let's go to the questions. So what do you see changing the owner's role in project controls? What are the trends? What is?
Yeah, so I think we got to start off by defining what project controls, from an owner standpoint is, right? So, the first part of project controls for an owner is setting baselines, right? There's an estimate classification system that an owner goes through to get a project approved. There's schedules that are supported at various phases of project development to get a project approved. All of that stems from developing a scope of work that an owner has to create to get a project to go into execution to implement. Obviously, there's risks and so on. So all of that starts to establish the baselines. And then once the project gets authorized for full project funding, in our industry, we call it FID, final investment decision, then the project goes into its control mode, right? Making sure that we adhere to those baselines. So cost control, schedule control, progress and performance measurement, those types of things. So over the years, owners had an internal capability of doing a lot of this work themselves. Right. Owners, take a picture back in the 80s and 90s. Many owners had their own engineering departments. They were definitely doing their own conceptual engineering. They'd probably do their own front end definition or their feed work. And a lot of them actually did their own detailed engineering. Right. And maybe even their own construction management. The only thing they were contracting out was typically construction, and then obviously the procurement of all the materials and so on. That has changed dramatically over the years, right? Today, owners have very little internal capability to do any of the design work, right? So they have to outsource almost everything, right? All the way from conceptual engineering through front-end design and then detailed design, procurement, construction are all contracted services. So it's a different world today, right? It used to be that the owners had their own very strong internal project control organizations. That, through all the other downsizing that owners have done, that has gone pretty much away as well, right? So what do we see today is that we have to oversee, as an owner, we have to oversee all these different contractors, right? And in some cases, we're actually seconding a lot of the project control work to a contractor to act on our behalf as an owner, right? There's a contracting strategy called EPCM, Engineering, Procurement, Construction Management, where that contractor is working as an owner engineer, and they're doing a lot of the front end work, and then they're actually managing the project through execution for owners. In that case, they are providing a lot of the project control services, that contractor that they hire. And the owner basically sits above that and just kind of makes sure that they're doing what we've asked them to do. Right. So part of what's changed in the world today is we as owners need to be much better communicators, right? We have to communicate what our needs are to these contractors so that we're getting the information, we're getting the transparency that we want from whoever is doing the project control function. And then typically in most owners today, we don't do a lot of the detailed project controls. We're receiving these reports from whoever's doing most of the control. And then we're spot checking, we're analyzing, we're maybe doing some owner views on that. So it's a little different world. The other things that are changing from an owner's perspective is the utilization of some of the newer techniques. And I wouldn't say they're newer, they've just maybe they're rebranded, right? Things like advanced work packaging. And I don't know if many of you have heard of what advanced work packaging is, but it's basically bringing in all of the execution details of how you're going to do the work up to the front end. That's the advanced part of it, right? So you're basically getting the path of construction. You're getting construction work packages into the front end so that the owner can better plan, they can better estimate, they can better schedule the work because they have much more detail. The reason I gave you the history lesson of owners and how they were structured is because we used to be able to do this internal with owner organizations. I had the construction manager sat right next to me, right? The engineering manager sat across from me, and we met every day, and I could get the information from those people because they were in the same office, they worked under the same basically roof as I did, and we could put the details together much more efficiently. Today, those people they don't get the paycheck from my company, right? From the owner company, they get it from a contractor or a consultant or something. And now I've got to communicate with them from a contractual basis of what my expectation is, right? And they need to then provide me that data. And it's a very transactional type thing where in the past it used to be almost natural, right? It was, by osmosis, you'd get this information because you sat in the same office every day and you were doing review meetings on a regular basis and so on. So the big change that we're seeing now to try to address that issue is the use of all these digital tools, right? Digital modeling, digital twins. And how do I relate that to project controls? Well, if you take the digital model and you can tie it to each of these packages, these work packages, whether it's a construction work package or a procurement work package or an engineering work package, they're all tied to a schedule, right? And then you're planning, or the reason we want to get the path of construction from the contractor and how that's going to support procurement and engineering, because all these packages will then be tied together basically in a schedule, and the plan will be timelined against the calendar. And so you can actually see in the digital model how the facility should be erected over time, right? You can actually stage it over time. You can create a video of this. Then what's the change is now we have to go out and update the model on actual work done, right? So now you take those same work packages. You said, did we complete that? And a work package is down to the detail of what one crew can do either in a day or a shift. So that's how detailed these things are getting. And now I can actually track the planned progress against the actual progress on a 3D model, right? So that is where the industry eventually will be going. It's there today. It's just pretty expensive to implement because it's not utilized that much. But project controls will be less about, I'll call it, analyzing the data more than analyzing a graphic depiction of status. And then those same work packages will be tied to a cash flow expectation, because as you execute those work packages, that'll be tied to a cash flow curve. And then you can actually track your actual cash flow curve against those work packages, because that's the way that we'll pay contractors to do the work, is by work package. And you see how it all ties together. So that's where we see the industry going eventually. Today, we're not there. And I'd say we're probably have more gaps today in the basic principles of project control than we've had for a long time. And a lot of this is because of this segmentation of the work and the fact that owners, just don't have the resources anymore to be able to do a lot of this internally. So they rely on others, and then it becomes a communication problem. And we don't communicate well. I mean, historically, this industry doesn't communicate well. And we see it coming to a bigger issue now because of all those interfaces. So I know I was a little long-winded there, but I think that's some of the changes we're seeing in the owner's role in project control.
Yeah, interesting, very interesting. It's interesting that a lot of the stuff you mentioned today now were subject to conversations and calls. I actually had today during the entire day, talking to different publics in Brazil and not in Colombia and other countries. So we always feel like it's very different what's happening perhaps in the US, but sometimes not that much different.
No, I don't think so. I don't think it's much different at all.
Yeah, that's interesting because the progress is reaching us at a tremendous speed, and I think it's going to hit everybody almost at the same time. Well, that's exciting times. And what kind of other controls? Sorry, other concerns you have related to this changing? This change role of the owner.
And it's not as much of that. It's a change. It's just different. So if you look back all the way into kind of grade school, high school level education, we don't teach project controls, right? If you get to the university level, we really still don't teach project controls. Project controls is then learned when we get on the job, right? Now, I think as this evolution of how we may be doing controls changes, I think what we need to do is now to instate training at very early levels within our education society as a world, right? Not just here in the US or in Brazil, but we need to let people know that project controls is a discipline that people can choose to follow. But a lot of times they don't even know about it until they get hired by an owner or a contractor or so on. And they say, oh yeah, let's focus on this cost and schedule stuff. So one of the things that I think that we really struggle with is not doing enough education on what project control is all about. And I know that every company has a little different twist on how they, the tools and the processes and maybe even the terminology and so on of project controls. But if you taught the basic principles, either at the grade school, probably more at their high school level, it doesn't need to be a college degree. People don't need to go to college to get into this discipline. There's very, very successful careers that can be had that doesn't need a university degree or so on. And this is one of them. You can make very, very good living and start making that living right out of, at least in the US, a high school education. But a lot of people don't even know that it exists, right? Now, one of the other things that I recommend for any project control individual is to get real life experience, so get to the field, understand how things come together, how they, when you talk about path of construction, right? What does that mean? What's the sequence of events that has to occur? How do things get paid for and so on? So even though we can educate people at the university level or even at the high school level, I think they do need to take a portion of their learning process has to be field activities and really understand, so that when you're actually asked to put a schedule together or to review a schedule, the sequence of things and how they should occur. We do a lot of schedule reviews for our clients, and it is amazing how just the basic logic is incorrect, right? And I think what's happened is we've groomed a lot of computer experts, right? People that know how to put stuff into Primavera or Microsoft Project or whatever the estimating database might be or so on. But they don't have the planning experience or the estimating experience. They're more reliant on the computer than they are the basic concepts of how things come together in the field, right? So I think they need to be trained or educated at a young level on what this whole discipline about project controls is all about, and then get the field experience to become kind of that project control manager, if you want, and so on. So I think one of my biggest concerns is the education, is feeding the pipeline of the next generation of project control people. And whether they sit on the owner's side or the contractor side, doesn't really matter. I don't think we have a lot of really talented project control people today, because many of them didn't grow up in the execution world, right? And knowing what they're good at moving numbers around and data, but they struggle when it comes to the logic of engineering, procurement, and construction, that process. And I think we need to focus more on that to get that talent back into the industry.
That's very interesting. I mean, it's once again, a reality that is, it's the same everywhere else. One would think also, again, that, here in the US, that kind of activity would be in a different level of advancement, but the challenges are very similar. When you say, that people, the profile of the people doing project controls work is changing. It's also changing, like in the projects where we see in other countries, and
yep.
I think that's probably has nothing to do with the country itself. It has really more to do with what's happening, right? So all of a sudden, you have all those tools and technology that is available, and you have to use them because that's the new.
Right.
They do have a very powerful purpose and results, right? I mean, if well implemented, right. But then I think it's probably very hard to plan that dephasing and phasing into a new reality, right?
Yeah, no, it's very true.
Interesting. I have a couple of questions coming from the audience I want to ask, because they also have a little bit to do with technology and project controls. And
sure.
So first, one of them says, do you think that Power BI or similar tools it says it's a reality to help project control? Does it help project control?
Yeah.
How do you use?
Yeah, no, I'll admit that I'm a novice at Power BI, but when you look at most of our clients, the way I understand Power BI is it's sitting above the data, right? The data is all retained in some location, maybe it's in Excel or whatever it happens to be, but you're creating the dashboard that allows you to take that data and then turn it into valuable information, right? So we've been trying to do this for years, right? And creating different software that gets you the right indicators, right? And whether that's planned cost versus actual cost, right? Whether it's planned hours versus actual hours, or how many feet of pipe did you plan to execute versus how many feet of pipe did you actually in a given month. So those metrics are awesome, right? That is what we're trying to establish when it comes to project controls, so that we can plan the work based on a certain level of productivity and so on, and then we actually see if we're achieving it, and if we're not achieving it, we know that as early as possible so that we can make the appropriate corrections. So I think that the tools like a Power BI, they're here to stay. I think the making sure that we're analyzing the data correctly and that we're creating the right metrics to review is critical. And then it's the quality of the data, right? To make sure that the data is coming in and feeding the system appropriately. I think eventually you're going to be, if we get to this digital twin technology to be a standard, you're almost instantaneous, right? So that day, you can have, based on the installation package, and that's all digitized, right? And now you actually fly a drone over that site and you see what was actually done, which is digitized. The digital data then basically provides you a status, right? Did you meet all the expectations that were established in the plan from the digital twin? Are you ahead or behind? And then you can adjust accordingly. The human interaction there is what do you do with the results that you actually receive? Now I'm going to go a step further where it may be not too far in the future, but it's definitely in the future. If you have all this data digitized, we're not too far off from having robots build our facilities. Right now, it's always been, oh, well, the construction industry is so different that we can't have robots. Every project's different. There's no way that I can get a robot to do what it does in a manufacturing plant to do in the field. That's not the case anymore, right? So if you have all this digital knowledge and then you program that into robots, the whole resource hour that we argue about, what does a person cost per hour and how many hours they're going to spend on a project and how much profit you're making and all that all goes away, right? And now it's the robots will do what the robots can do, and there's not going to be much variability unless the robot breaks down or something, an outside influence impacts that robot. The robot's productivity is going to be built into that robot, and when you plan the job, you're going to have that data that knows what that robot can do in a day. And by the way, what's to say that the robot has to work 8 hours a day? There's no reason the robot can't work 24 hours a day. They don't need light, right? They need data points, right? So I know it sounds a little out there, but if you look at where we are as an industry from a productivity standpoint, we're pretty much stagnant over the last 20, 25 years. It takes the same amount of time to weld facilities, to build facilities as it did 25 years ago. We've gotten much safer, but it's taken about the same amount of time, right? So our productivity hasn't improved that much. If you look at other industries, what does it take to produce, by the way, take all of this out of the pandemic, environment, right? Because that changed a lot of things.
Yeah.
But if you take a look at what it takes to manufacture an automobile today, it's a lot less labor hours than there's basically almost no labor hours. It's all done by robots. If you take a look at agriculture and what it takes to harvest the field, right? They can fly a drone over a field. It maps the field. It sends that information to the harvester, the combine, and it autonomously, there's no person involved. It goes and harvests the wheat or the corn or whatever it happens to be. So other industries have adopted the technology that we are way behind on, right? And we can automate a lot of the activities that right now are driven by hours, resource hours, people hours. So why if it's taken so long to implement technology? A lot of it has to do with the way that we contract out for work. Right. So if we continue to compensate contractors by how many hours they put on a job, we'll never get out of this. What incentive do they have to minimize hours if that's the way they get paid? Right. So we've got to, there's a shift that has to happen in the way that we compensate contractors for their work. Right. It should be based on, ultimately, it should be based on the value they're providing, but it should be based on deliverables, right? So if they can produce, if they can erect the steel, in whatever, 5 weeks, right? Then however they erect that steel, I'm going to pay them. So it's almost like a lump sum, but even lump sums are based on how many hours, people, and so on and so forth. But so I'm getting a little futuristic here, but it's not that it can't happen and we have to create things. The things are already there, right? There are robots that can build things, right? That can do construction. There's a piece of equipment called a SAM. It's a semi-automated mason, and it can lay brick just as actually more efficiently than masons can, right? And so on and so forth. So it's not that the technology is holding us back. It's our ability to implement the technology. Right. So that has to happen. Then we compensate people differently for the work that they're performing. Project controls will be a very different animal if that all occurs, right? Because now we're less about productivity. We're more about the basic plan and does that meet the business case? Because the robots are just going to do what the robots do. Yeah. Sorry, went out there in a little bit.
It's good. It's good. It's fascinating discussion, and it's what we in the industry are discussing every day, right? Those things are happening. Augmented reality, all those things already being starting to be implemented.
Yeah.
And I think it's interesting to see how it will be interesting to see. I'm not saying good necessarily.
Yeah, and it also goes back to now education, right? So, let's say we address this issue about teaching project controls and basically projects. If you go to an engineering university, when they teach engineering, so I'm a mechanical engineer. When I learned mechanical engineering, it had very little to do with engineering construction type projects. It had to do with more manufacturing, research and development, those types of engineering disciplines. It wasn't project work, right? So first of all, we got to kind of rejuvenate or not, it's not resurrect because it was never there. We have to institute project training at the university level. So to get our engineers kind of geared for projects and so on. So in that curriculum, we've got to create the project control portion of that curriculum as well. Planning, scheduling, estimating, all that kind of stuff. Now here's the issue, right? So let's say we do that and we can get people more into that mode of teaching this at education, university and even pre-university levels. But now let's say the industry changes to a lot more of this digital approach, then we're teaching the wrong things at the university for people to have value in the field. So we got to make sure that as things are changing in the working world, that if we are going to push more of this into the high schools and the universities, that they're up to speed. And a lot of times what happens is the people that go to teach at the university are retired individuals. So they're teaching what they knew when they went through the industry. And sometimes it's outdated. And I think in the next couple of years, things are going to change a lot faster than they had in the past, right? So somebody that might be out of the industry for a couple of years, it's going to probably be very outdated on what the technology is for the future.
Yeah, that's also interesting. So today I was discussing, we have one partner of mine is the head of the civil engineering faculty in one university in Peru, and he's saying that nowadays it's already changing there. So throughout the entire program, all disciplines have to be BIM based. Mm-hmm. So they're teaching the basics of engineering and everything else. So BIM is like a transversal discipline that touches all the basic disciplines that they're teaching.
Yeah, no, and so a lot of what I've been talking about, if you get out of the process industry, the building industry through BIM is applying a lot of this stuff, right? So that the BIM model basically takes your 3D model and does all these other things associated with that model. So what we're trying to do, and the process industry always felt that it was very different, right? We're not like a building. A building is the same thing every floor. Right? I mean, we can standardize a lot more in the process industry. We just choose to not do it that way.
Interesting. Let me go back now to another question from the audience, if you don't mind. It's obviously related to that as well. So the question is, to overcome the integration problem you discussed in the beginning, should the owner concentrate on policies and plans, or should they go down, to softwares and tools and reports and so and whatnot?
Yeah. So what our recommendation is when you hire a contractor, right? You're hiring them for a number of reasons. One is they have the experience in doing the kind of work that you need to get done. You're also hiring them because they're efficient at what they do, right? So if you drive policies and practices and procedures and so on that the contractor has to follow, then you might make them less efficient by having them follow all the owner requirements. Now, that's not to say that their end result, that whatever they do to control their projects, right? Their cost tools, their schedule tools, and all that. The owner should define the criteria or the details around what the contractor needs to provide them and in what format, right? But the how they get there, I think you want to leave that up to the contractor to use their own tools, their own processes, so that you don't disrupt their efficiency in the way that they do work. And hopefully, again, you've analyzed that as part of the selection process for a contractor. But you don't want to take them off their game, right? And put them into an environment that's very unfamiliar. They can always use that as an excuse. Oh, I wasn't comfortable with your systems. Oh, I had a learning curve, and this, that, and the other thing. And next thing you know, you're paying them for all of that.
As they do, yeah.
Yeah. So our recommendation, Pathfinders, typically is the owner needs to define what they need to run the project from their end. The contractors need to tell them, yes, we'll provide it in that format, but we're going to use, our tools, our processes, our resources, and so on. So hopefully that answers that question.
Yeah, no, I think it does. Thanks. I have another question here that says, what is the correct average level of detail an owner should input into a baseline schedule, assuming the owner is bringing a core team and that the actual construction methods will be the responsibility of the contractor?
Right. I think what this person's getting to is one of the issues about this advanced work packaging. So an owner, well, most owners today have little to zero construction capability, construction knowledge. So they do need to rely on some other people. A lot of times they'll hire a front-end contractor to do their front-end engineering, and they're going to ask them also to kind of input into the construction side of things. So I think what the question is about is, how detailed does an owner put those work packages together? And then when you go hire a contractor, you can't legitimately expect them to follow that process because it's not their, again, you're taking them outside of their comfort zone. So what the philosophy is that you should be looking at the people that are going to actually do the work, the construction manager and the construction resources, as early as FEL3, and you bring them in to create these construction work, the path of construction, the construction work areas, and the construction work packages all the way up in FEL3. But the people putting that together are going to be the actual people that do the work. So what does that do? That totally changes your contracting, philosophy, right? Because now you're bringing them in before you even define, or you've gone out to bid like an EPC type of a contract. So that's where the disconnect's happening in the industry right now. The reason some people are going to this EPCM contract is they bring the contractor in FEL3. They are responsible for doing the front end package, the engineering package. They will also be retained, if they do a good job, they're also retained to do the detailed engineering and execution and the construction management. So if they're responsible for the construction management, they're developing the path of construction and the construction work packages. And they can provide that all the way back up front because it's the same team, right? And now you don't have that excuse that I'm following somebody else's idea of how construction can be efficient. And hopefully you're addressing that issue. So the owner should stay out of it, right? Because they're not experts at construction. The people that are actually going to build the facility need to come up with those work packages in the front of in the front end activities to support that estimate and schedule development. Hopefully that helps.
Yeah, cool. Interesting. Good. Thank you. We have another 10 minutes. Perhaps you can tell us a little bit about the how do you see the future of the project controls discipline, please?
Yeah, and I explained a little bit about this already, but the digital world is not going to go away, right? So we are going to be in a much more digitized environment, right? And whatever tool you happen to select to use, we're going to be creating much more modeling of our facilities, much more of this work packaging and so on. The integration between our digital design and our schedules and our estimates are all going to be linked together. So if I change something in the design, it'll automatically have an impact on the others rather than trying to communicate it verbally. So I think that that's here to stay, and it's going to grow, right? Mention things like potential with robots, right? Now that's a little bit further out there, but I don't think it's that far out there. I think it's around the corner, because you know, think of what the primary driver is for every owner and contractor is safety, right? We want to make sure that we keep our people safe. What if we got rid of people and we had robots build it, right? So, you know, sooner or later, we're going to get smart about this and say, yeah, we've got the technology, we got the capability to do this. Let's go down this route, right? But now we've got to compensate the people that own the robots and that technology and so on. We got to figure out how to compensate them for to build these facilities in that mode. I think, you know, if you go to that idea of everything's tied together in this digital model, right? So as you know, as I said, you have these installation work packages, and they're planned by schedule, so you can actually see this digital model be built virtually on your screen every day, right? That's the plan. And then you can see, like in a different color, you actually see the actual kind of be building it by what's actually done. And there's no reason that you can't tie things like invoicing against that, right? That as soon as that model is signed off by somebody that, yep, that's exactly what was done today, there's an invoice that's sent. And to be even more, I guess, futuristic, but not futuristic, is using things like blockchain. Right. And blockchain basically takes out all the middle people. And it says, okay, that invoice is not really an invoice, right? It's an automatic, it's a step in that blockchain that goes to the owner, that says the owner then needs to issue the cash, whatever that is. Maybe it might be Bitcoin or something in the future, but the process, one of the things that's driving the industry crazy right now is extended payment terms on vendors and contractors. So the owners used to pay within 30 days. The reason they paid within 30 days is when it was a paper transaction, to receive the invoice in the mail, right? Regular mail, for then somebody to take it and make a carbon copy or maybe a copy of it to send it to finance, for finance to analyze it and actually handwrite a check, it took about 30 days. So then we went to automation and we stayed with 30 days, right? Now what's happening? Now we're extending those to 60, 90, 120. For what reason? There's no other reason that the owners, other than the owners want to hold on to their money longer, right? But what's happening is the contractors now have to fund these projects, right? Because that worker that does a piece of work, let's say the beginning of January, that invoice may not go out until maybe the middle of January, maybe the end of January. By the time it's processed by the owner, let's say they go to a net 90-day payment terms, by the time that contractor gets paid for the hour that they paid in January to the worker, it's 4 months. I know some companies are going to net 120 days. So now it's half a year, right? That by the time the invoice gets processed all the way through. So now the contractors of the world are funding all that work that's done until they end up getting paid, right? So it's to some degree, it's not even a fair system, but they're getting away with it. So the idea behind this blockchain approach is you take all that out, right? So what are the contractors doing? The contractors to support that net 120-day payment cycle, they're escalating their rates, right? Or they're borrowing money and then they're taking the interest rate and building that into their rates. They're doing something to handle that issue, right? So the owners aren't saving money. It's actually costing them money in the long run. To minimize all of that. Now, CII, the Construction Industry Institute's done a bunch of studies around this, and they say that the non-value added costs associated with a project are somewhere around 40%, right?
Wow.
So you take,
huge.
and why? Because if you look at the way that you've got somebody you have the owner that needs an asset. The owner hires a contractor. A contractor hires subcontractors. The subcontractors hire vendors to provide the equipment and so on. The vendors have suppliers. The suppliers have manufacturers. The manufacturers have, raw material vendors and so on and so there's so many layers of profit and things like that are built into the system that it's overbearing sometimes, right? So if you can minimize some of those layers of redundancy, I'll take insurance as an example. An owner requires that everybody has to have the same level of insurance across a project. The average project is overinsured by about 3 or 4%, the 300 to 400%, because every layer has to cover themselves with insurance policies. All of that's getting put back into their rates that the owner has to end up paying for. So if we can come up with a way that you have a global insurance for a project and everybody else just kind of follows into that bucket. If you figured out a way to minimize all those redundant overheads and profits that are in that whole supply chain through use of blockchain or something like that, you can start to whittle away that 40% to something that's a lot more, take 20% out, take it down to 20%. Just think, in our billions of dollars that we spend on projects, that's hundreds of millions of dollars that either the owners are saving or that can be put back in for more projects. So, I think that's kind of some of the way that the industry is moving. I think you're going to see a lot more drones, autonomous vehicles, less utilization of the human element and more use of automation and so on. And project controls is going to have to follow suit. Like, how do we measure those things when it's not based on the hour somebody puts in, but it's based on the deliverable that is produced in a day or a week or whatever it happens to be. So I think that's where some of the big changes may occur in the future.
Yeah, that's all great conversation. Thank you so much, Stephen. We have a few more minutes. If you want to expand in any other. Oh, sorry. I do always have a question. Before we go, just make sure. We'd like to hear from you. How do you see the importance of being a member of an association as the AACE?
Yeah.
How does it help in the profession and so on?
Well, I think I might have answered that already by telling you how many societies that I personally am a member of, and also Pathfinder is a member of. But I think they're invaluable to the industry, right? I mean, the way that we need to communicate better, we need to collaborate better, we need to create more relationships and less kind of transactional type things. And the societies allow us to do that. We can collaborate on standards, we can collaborate on work processes and tools and things like that to build the industry. I think one of the great things about AACE is it starts to build a common set of terminology, right? So what we see, we do projects all around the world, and it still amazes us that, what people call things is very different. Take productivity. Productivity of greater than 1 or less than 1. Is that good or bad? It all depends on how you do the formula. And not everybody has agreed on, what's the denominator when you're doing a productivity calculation. We need to standardize on that to minimize the non-necessary noise that's in the system. So I think, being a member of AACE and a lot of these other societies is key to, and that's where this education can come from as well. You don't have to rely on the universities to do the education or the grade schools. You can tap into AACE, and there are kind of registered education providers there that could be augmenting the universities and the grade schools and so on. So it doesn't have to come from scratch. It can come from existing resources that are already there in societies like AACE.
Agreed, 100%. Well, Stephen, once again, thank you so much for being here today.
You are welcome.
Little bumps in the beginning.
No problem.
It was great. was really
Yeah,
great.
and if there are other questions and people want to send them to you, and if you want me to answer them, I'd be happy to do that. And kind of address any of the questions that maybe we couldn't get to today.
Sounds good. Do you want to give your email address so people can write straight to you as well?
Sure. So it's SL, so Stephen is the S, right? L is in Lewis, and then Cabano, CABANO, and then it's at Pathfinder Inc., all one word, Pathfinder Inc. So PATHFINDERINC.com.
All right, excellent. Well, again, thank you so much. Thank you everybody who are listening to us today. In about a month's time, we're going to have the next connection program of the AACE Brazil section. And I'll see you there. See you. Have a good evening, everybody.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Steven. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.